click, click.
Ah, the red light is on.
Red light is on. That means we are taping. So, Dad, we talked about this a little bit, but these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. College experience, early married life, and where you went to different parts of the country for education. And then the next stage would be talking about courtship with Mom and with Judy as well. And then we'll see where we go from there. We've got a whole list of things, but why don't we let you just take.
Where would you like to start?
Let's start with your college experience and yeah, tell us what did you pursue as a college student and what kind of things
College.
you attained to.
College occurred during what I call my 10-year formation period of my life.
Okay.
I graduated from high school at 17 because of the way the school program was set up in Salt Lake City schools. Supposedly, this was to give kids an early jump on college, but it wasn't very good for me. My first year of college, I didn't have the foggiest idea of what I wanted to do, so I just took general courses with the exception of calculus. And I managed to flop calculus royally.
So you decided not to be a mathematician then?
I still don't know. I know the idea behind calculus, but the equations of how they get there is another question.
Okay.
But I did enjoy, for instance, in my first college year, I did enjoy geology. And of course, in the state of Utah, there's a lot of geology that you can use. That first year was a not a total disaster, but not the best. Which put me in the position when it came to setting up for another year of not going the next year. And really setting up for the next year and not going the next year meant that I had to go to work somewhere and that I would wait for my mission call. So I worked a number of places after I got out of my first year of college and waited for my mission call. Well, all of this was about 1950. All of this had a lot to do with a thing called the Korean War. And I decided that I'd go back to school and get a deferment by being in the Air Force ROTC program and keep me in school, finish school before I went on a mission. So my dear father gave me a book entitled Architecture, an Art for All Seasons. And the reason he gave me that book was because the university had just started a new program in architecture. And he thought I might be interested in it. So, lo and behold, 2 years after I went the first year, I started back into college. Signed up for ROTC, got my deferment. I actually actually worked for a couple of years in between there, and waiting for my draft call to come. And that was another thing prompting me to get back to school, is that I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and the draft call didn't come. And decided to go back to school. I worked several interesting jobs during those 2 years. One job was working for J.I. Case Company, the farm equipment manufacturer. And I had a job working in the warehouse unloading farm equipment from the railroad cars as they came in. And man, that stuff is heavy. Particularly the wheel weights they put on the tractors so the tractors don't slip and fall. The only really fun part of that job was driving the tractors off of the box cars and into the whole showroom. But outside of that, it was all pure labor. Prior to that job, I had a job that my grandfather arranged for me at the Lang Company, which was a steel fabricating company that made big tanks, like you see gas stored in or oil stored in. And that was their main business. And he got me a job there. Ostensibly, I wanted to be in the layout section of that company, which laid the steel out in different shapes and sizes to make the different things they made. But I got hired rather as a helper, and learned a little bit about the steel business. It was here that I nearly killed myself. One way that they transported the sheets of steel around the shop was to put a clamp on them, and the clamp was attached to a chain, and the chain was attached to a crane. And you would lift the sheet up 2 or 3 inches off the ground, and then transport it down these transportways on the crane and move it from one part of the shop to the other. Well, I was tasked with moving one of these sheets from one place to another. And I put a clamp on the edge of the sheet, tightened it down as tight as I could, and that never ceases to amaze me, was that you could tighten this little screw onto this sheet of steel, huge sheet of steel, maybe 10 feet long and 8 feet tall, probably weighing 20 or 30 tons. You could put that screw on there and could really pick it up with the crane and move it somewhere. Well, that's what I did. And I was all ready to haul it off and move it down the production line when all of a sudden, zip. For one reason or another, the clamp wasn't on tight. And this sheet of steel slipped out of the clamp and stood on the edge. Now, this sheet of steel was maybe half an inch thick, but it was standing right on its edge. And me, like like a ninny was going to hold it up. And I put my hand up to study that piece of steel as it was in this upright position. And then something told me to get out of there. And I jumped out as fast as I could move. And 2 seconds later, that sheet of steel keeled over and went flat, right on the spot where I was standing. Well, the sheet of steel that coming down made a great big crash. Could be heard all over the shop, and brought everybody running to see what had happened. And fortunately, I was preserved at that time. But it also gave me a pretty good indication that this wasn't for me. And I actually saw a man killed inside the shop, fooling around, working with that steel. For a while, the work slowed down, and I was put to washing windows way up high, sometimes 20, 30 feet above the ground. I was washing windows. And then the job stopped entirely. But my dear grandfather helped me get that job to start with. He was actually the comptroller for the company at the time. That's when I went to JIK's and the tractors. In the meantime, I was looking for something a little better, and I made an application for a federal job with the Bureau of Reclamation, which was a dam builder, aqueduct builder, water preserver agency throughout the western United States. And they had a couple of small projects going in Utah at the time. Well, not so small then. One was a Salt Lake Aqueduct. Came all the way from Deer Creek Reservoir. And, but they had a couple of jobs going at the time and had a field office in Provo, Utah. Well, as luck would have it, I guess, I was able to get a job with the government working for the Bureau. And I went down to live in Provo during that time. I always remember one comment. The man that was helped me get a job at JIK was a member of our ward. And when I told him I was going to leave and go to work for the government, he said, "Well, we're sorry to see you live, Charlie." He said, "Maybe one of these days all of us are going to be working with the government." I always remember him saying that. Maybe all of us are going to be working with the government. But anyway, so I moved down to Provo. Took a job with the Bureau. I was the gopher in the office. A gopher's person goes for this and goes for that. Does everything else that nobody else wants to do. It was in this office that for the year and a half I worked there, I was known by the name of Slim. Nobody used my given name. I was Slim. Everybody called me Slim. Year and a half I was Slim.
And hasn't been used since, right?
I've changed since.
Yeah.
What I did there at the office was I took care of drawings. I did a little bit of drafting. I took care of photographs. We'd have these field engineers go out and photograph a project and show what the progress was, and I'd come in and get the photographs developed and all that kind of stuff, take care of that, one of the gopher jobs. But it was a good experience working for the Bureau. And about halfway through that job, lo and behold, the bishop called me in one day and said, well, it's about time for you to go on a mission. I said, yeah, it's true, it is.
So you were about 22 at this point, right?
No, I had turned 20, I was just 20.
Just 20, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in college at 17.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Cut a couple of years to knock around.
Okay.
So, we'll pass up the experiences in Provo. I'll just say I worked there for a while, and then the bishop had me called to go on a mission. And so I stopped my job, moved back up to Salt Lake, went to the mission home, went through a week of mission training. Right from the beginning, there was always a question of whether I'd be going or not. And it turned out that the draft board made a deal with the church that every other young person that got called on mission could go, and the others would stay. And I was one of the others. And so we had a farewell, we bought my clothes, we did all sorts of things to get ready, and then the draft board wouldn't let go of my number. So.
And you were actually called, was it the Southern States or what?
I was called to the Southern States Mission,
Okay.
which was headquartered at that time in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
Yes. And it included about 4 or 5 states in that mission at that time. Really huge.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I quit having thoughts about going on a mission and went back, and the job I left was still there, they hadn't filled yet, so they took me back
In Provo.
in Provo. So
Okay.
I moved back down to Provo. During the first time I was in Provo, I actually lived with 5 or 6 other college boys in a basement apartment. It's where I got to enjoy potatoes so much because one of the boys that we roomed with, his father was a grocery man, and every time he'd go home to see his parents, he'd bring them back 100 or 200 potatoes.
Wow.
And so we learned how to fix potatoes for all different kinds of meals. Potatoes for breakfast, potatoes for lunch, potatoes for dinner. We always had potatoes. That's what I did the first time. The second time I went down there, I actually lived with the family as a boarder, and they gave me room and board, meals, and I had a number of activities there. I actually entered the tennis tournament in Provo. One of the summers I was there, for instance, played basketball with the ward team, a number of things. By August of that year, the year I was called on the mission, I had made up my mind of going back to college and trying for a deferral by being in the ROTC. And it was during that year that my dad gave me the book we talked about, and the new department opened up at the university. And so I enrolled in the university in the architecture department in that's 1952.
So a brand new program.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was just started.
Oh.
And that's what I did for the next 3 years, is attend the architecture program and work during the summers up in Alaska. That's another story.
Doing, just a quick, doing what?
Surveying roads.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then at the end of 3 years, had you completed your degree, or was that still pending?
What's that?
At the end of the 3 years, had you completed your degree, or was that still
Well, I
pending?
didn't quite make it for 3 years.
Okay, okay.
We, the ROTC just worked out just fine until the 3rd year. In the 3rd year of ROTC, in the college campus, you had to go to summer camp. And having to go to summer camp messed up all of my opportunities to work. It came right in the middle. You got paid for it before you were there, but still it came right in the middle of the summer. You did something before you went, you did a little, try to do something before you. And I was at this time earning all of my money on the jobs for paying for my college. But that kind of squelched that. The other thing that the Air Force did for me is it killed a dream I had. I, for years, had thought I'd like to be a pilot. All during this time, I had lots of problems with my nose, sinuses, hay fever. That should have been a clue, but I wasn't going to be a pilot. But the Air Force had to take me up in a jet aircraft and then put it in a steep dive so I couldn't hear myself think. My ears were ringing, and it would hurt. It really hurt. And that's something that summer training did for me.
Okay.
It knocked out my income. Knocked out my income, and it also knocked out my becoming a pilot. Now, I probably could have become a navigator, because my eyesight was good, my ears were okay, but it never did dawn on me to pursue that. as a result, when I got back out of summer camp, I scrounged around trying to find a job to do while I was in school to pay my way. And I got a job as a caretaker in an apartment house, which required me to take care of all the trash that was collected during the day, put it out on other sundry items, for which I got a room and a small amount of money. So I moved out of my parents' home up to the apartment house and started back to school. But in order to stay in school, I needed another job, and so I went to work for a contractor designing houses. Well, between school and two jobs, I couldn't cut it. And school got tougher and tougher, and I got poorer and poorer. And by the end of the term, I was hardly going at all. Well, that
She can't keep it.
I can't.
Should we? Okay. Okay.
continuing the saga.
Part 2.
As a result, I probably did the worst quarter of college work I ever did at that time. And my deferment was canceled. And lo and behold, in January, my number came up for the draft. And so in January of 1955, I somewhat reluctantly joined the U.S. Army for a 2-year service. That's another story.
And that's where you ended up in Germany for a little
That's
while.
that's where I ended up in Germany.
Okay.
Actually, I trained in the Army and I actually took the test for being a paratrooper and passed it.
Huh.
And I thought I was going to go off to paratroop school. But when they came around making assignments, it said Germany. So I said, that's fine. I had no desire to break my neck going out of a plane anyway. So I thought Germany was just a fine assignment. So we've taken an interlude there from school, a couple of weeks, a couple of years. And in February of 1957, I get back out of the service. I get another summer in Alaska. I go up and talk to Dr. Bailey, who's the head of the department, and he said, Pixton, I think you just better take 4 years of architecture. I said, fine. And so I took my 4th year and graduated in 1958.
Was this just before you were married then to Mom, and
Well, yes,
Is that-
because it was
same?
during that
Same year.
summer, while I was up in Alaska, that I asked your mother to marry me,
Okay.
long distance.
And that story is coming shortly.
I guess. So, in 58 I graduated from college. I did not get a professional degree. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a major in architecture. I had a good time that semester. I had to take some fine arts courses. So I took some watercolor, and I took some ceramics, and I took some weaving. And I had a grand old time that semester. Not much architecture. One thing I liked about architecture was architectural history. And there was a book by an author by the name of Pevsner on European architecture, and I carried that little book around with me all the time I was in Germany and visited many of the places that were in the book. So, now there are a couple of highlights. I did do some good things in college. There were a couple of highlights. My brother was in college at the same time as I was for a couple of years. And we both joined up with the men's glee club, and took several trips, one of which went to Southern California. This was the instance in which the director of the choir liked to drive a big white Cadillac. He liked his white Cadillac. And we were taking a trip to Southern California to LA, and driving through the desert of Nevada to get there. The chorus was in a bus, and the director was in his white Cadillac up ahead of us. As we tooled along the highway, all of a sudden up in front of us, we saw a great big black cloud mushroom up through the Nevada air, and we wondered what was happening.
Impeccable timing.
We got within about 200 yards of this beautiful white Cadillac burning, and the director and his wife and a company is sitting down on the side of the road with their luggage all out, and somehow, some way, this beautiful car caught fire, and so they rode the rest of the way with us on the bus. That's one of the highlights. One of the other highlights was when my brother was we had to take a PE class. At the University of Utah, you had to take swimming if you couldn't swim and pass. You had to take another semester of PE, and so Richard and I decided to take a fencing class. And so we learned all about sabers and all kinds of pointy things that you poke at people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a good time together. Learned to be fencemen.
Cool.
Couple of highlights of my college.
Yeah.
That and, well, let couple other stories too. You want to hear a couple other stories?
You bet. You bet.
Judy's heard this one, but maybe you have too, but during the time I was in architecture school, Frank Lloyd Wright was the icon of architecture in the United States. He did a number of commissions for small houses in the Salt Lake area. And one time he was up to visit with a client, and the dean of our school called him and asked him to come out and talk to the students. So one afternoon we had this big gathering of all the students in the display room, and Frank was going to talk to us. He got introduced, and the first thing that came out of his mouth when he got up to say was, "I don't know why you're going to school here. They don't know how to teach you architecture."
Nice.
And he says, "You ought to go someplace where you really can learn. Let's see what kind of work you're doing." Well, we had one of our projects was up on the display boards. The design project we had to do was a monastery garden, okay? And he got to looking at the presentations, the drawings, and things that we made with our ideas on it. And he got to mine. And I had spelled monastery wrong. And his comment about mine is, "You see what I'm talking about? They don't even teach you how to spell at this school."
Oh no. So maybe they didn't invite him back.
I don't think they ever invited him back, no. But that's the highlight of my architectural critiques. Yeah. Interesting times.
Mm. So then you took your degree and you went out. You went to Denver first, and then
Well, no.
no. Where were you
I
first?
took my
after-
degree and went up to Alaska one more summer,
One more summer. Okay.
in which I asked your mother hand in marriage, okay? And when I finished up in Alaska for that summer, came home and got married.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to know?
So if I'm remembering correctly, after marriage, you went down to Provo for about a semester or so, and then you went.
Yeah.
Then you moved to Denver.
After I had graduated, and after I'd gone to work another summer, I pretty well made up my mind I wasn't going to be practicing architecture. I pretty well had made up my mind it was going to be city planning, regional planning, something of that nature. It was going to be planning, but it wasn't going to be architecture. I thought that architects were too puffed up with their own good. And I couldn't get myself to be that way. You know, it's one of these cases, you know, if the client wants a blue bathroom, give them a green bathroom. Kind of a thing, you know. So, I tried to patch together community planning program down at the Y for a semester. And took a couple interesting classes. One which served me well all the way through my career. I took a class in social organization, which talks about all the formal groups that people belong to and what they do. And I also tried to work at a couple of places in the area. But after a semester, decided that what I had pulled together wasn't going to do it, and I need to go to work and then go to planning school. And so after a semester at the Y, we pulled up stakes for Provo and went back to Denver. Okay.
Okay, what would you like to field next? We've got talking about courtships. We could do that, and then talk about.
We can do that because that fits together with what we just talked about.
Yeah. Okay.
Although it's still strung out over the same 10 years.
And then some.
Yeah, that was the addendum.
That's right.
And Judy and mine's courtship was strung out over a course of about 4 months. And it was 4 months too long for her.
And she's still questioning whether it was a courtship.
Well, courtship of your mother, Pat. I was in my second round of taking basic training in Fort Carson, Colorado, south of Denver, when I met your brother. I'd gone through the first round up until the last week. This was when I was drafted in January of '55. Up till the last week, everything went fine, and then I got a cold. In the Army, you don't get sick. You're either on the field or you're in the hospital, but you're not in between anywhere. And as a result, I got put in the hospital with a cold for a week, and it washed me out of the first training session. So I got put into the second training session. And which was a good deal because I had an old sergeant in charge of the platoon, and he said, I want you to be my guidon bearer. That's a little flag. And I just set the pace for the troops. So I got to be the guidon bearer and say the pace for the troops. He says, one thing the guidon bearer in my platoon doesn't do is draw a KP. But that suits me just fine.
KP, kitchen patrol, right?
Kitchen police.
Yeah.
I said, that suits me just fine. And so I made sure I was all spit and polished going out. As a result, I had most of my evenings free. After about 3 or 4 weeks of basic training, they allow you to go off base. And so the first week I could do that, I called up a family that we knew in Salt Lake that were now living in Denver and asked them to give me a date with a girl from the ward in Denver, which they did. And so I I went up for the weekend to Denver and dated this girl. And first and last time I ever saw her. And the next day, which was Sunday, I went to church. And there was your mother singing in the choir. They were going to have a fireside that night. So I went to the fireside. I learned what her name was, but for the whole evening, I couldn't get her to give me an address or a telephone number. And so I went back to the post that night with a new friend, I thought, but without knowing where she lived or how to reach her. That's where my friends was all that helped out. They supplied some essential information. And for 2 or 3 weekends while in training, I went up to Denver and saw Pat and did some things with her. One place we went to was the Museum of Natural History. She had a cousin that did wildlife sculpturing.
Kenny Bunn?
Kenny Bunn, yes. And he had some of his work in that museum. And so it was an interesting time. And I think I saw your mother maybe 2 or 3 times during that period. Then the big time came to graduate.
From basic.
To graduate from basic training finally. And I told you about taking the test for being a paratrooper and passing it. Surprised me. But when the actual time came for making assignments, they gave me an assignment to Germany. And one of my end of my training remembrances was that they always have this grand party saying goodbye to everybody, so long goodbye, and all that stuff. And of course, there was liquor being served. And they knew I was a teetotaler. So I became the barman for the night of the farewell party to everybody. I'd never made a drink in my life. I was told that night I made some pretty powerful ones. And that was my first and only association with a bar. But that's almost like when I was up in Alaska. We were camped out maybe 20 miles from town. A little town called Nenana. And Nenana had a hot springs. A man and his wife bought it. They raised tomatoes all year round off the hot spring, but they also ran this bath. You could have a family bath, you could have a all-male bath, you could have an all-female bath. You could rent it for, but anyway, it became my assignment on Saturday nights truck and run the rest of the men into Indiana to get a bath for the week and to and to then try the local bars out until they were about gone. And I was still teetotaler, so I was still awake and alive to drive them back home without crashing everything. A similar type of experience with liquor. Well, going on with the courtship of your mother. Before I left, I asked her if she'd mind if I would write her. And she said, no, that'd be fine. And so, for the next 18 months that I was in Germany, I wrote rather consistently to your mother. Maybe on average about one letter every 2 weeks. Took that long for the letters to get back and forth. And we talked about this and we talked about that. And got to know each other through letters. In all my courting of your mother, we only had maybe 4 or 5 formal dates with each other. All the rest of these informal things and letters. And that went on for till the time I got mustered out of the Army. And on the way home to Salt Lake from Fort Dix, New Jersey, I stopped off at Denver on the way home and saw her for the first time in 18 months. And she was still not committed to anyone, although she said that she had 5 proposals meantime.
Some of them more serious than others.
What's that?
Some of them more serious than others.
Maybe, I don't know. I only know one situation where the fellow was really serious. This is a fellow that showed up at her parents' door when they moved to California. One day knocked on their apartment door, saw Mrs. Walden there. He said, how's Pat doing? Well, as far as I know, just fine. He said, is he really treating her right? As far as I know, just fine. He says, that's all I wanted to know. And that's all I ever heard of it. At least that's the way the story came to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was in the spring of '58, just before I was going to make one more trip to Alaska, that Pat's brother, John, graduated from BYU. And I went down to see her and to see his graduation, see the parents. And I guess it was about that time we decided we might think about getting together. It's kind of interesting. just before I went to Alaska the last time, my bishop called me into his office and said, well, what about a mission? He says, we still have your mission funds sitting in a kitty here in the ward. That's 6 years proof, something like that. And I looked the bishop in the eye and I said, well, Bishop, I don't think so this time. I think I'm going to get married. And that was that.
This
So,
mysterious girl in Colorado, huh?
what's that?
This mysterious girl in Colorado that nobody knew about.
I guess. Yeah. And so it was in the middle of that last summer working in Alaska that I called her up long distance one day, asked her to marry me. She said yes. I got back from Alaska one day. She came over. We went to the jewelry shop and got her an engagement ring. Up until this time, she had nothing. All her friends were asking her where her ring was. She would say up in Alaska. And
Hasn't dug it out yet.
and the next day we were married.
Wow.
Very simple occasion that time. I guess, was there a reception? Was there
Oh,
a
well,
little?
yes. My mother held a reception for us up in the Hotel Utah, up there in the dining room. She worked for the hotel, could make arrangements. We should preface by all of this by this 10-year earner that we're talking about, was a period of time when my father was very ill. And my mother was working. And with the exception of living at home, I was pretty much on my own, as far as the school was concerned. But that's how that was our courtship. It was on a date I took Pat on when I just got out of the service. The day when I stopped off in Denver, it was then I took her to a nice restaurant in downtown Denver. I always remember that restaurant because it had this immaculate waiter, all dressed up, waistcoat, white shirt, and tie. And I always remember him because he had this little brush and this little tiny dustpan. And you eat a piece of bread, go crunch, crunch. You put some crumbs on his table, and he'd come along, brushing up the crumbs and putting them in his little pan, slipping them in his waistcoat pocket. I always remember him.
Did you get a chance there to laugh about it, or did you wait until afterwards?
We laughed about it, yes we did. Grandfather was hilarious. He thought, oh my goodness. But we had a total of 4 or 5 dates. Yeah, and 3 years of acquaintanceship. So it can be done.
Yeah.
Can't be, yeah. All right, is that enough?
Well, that I think that covers the topic. Any other? Yeah. I mean, no. So then, so then fast forward a few decades, and we're talking about
Through the year
Judy.
decades, okay. Well, we made good music together, you and me.
Good job, guys! Yay!
Okay, you go like this, and I'm gonna go like this.
Y'all need to do pictures too.
Okay, you're gonna start up here like this, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, okay? Okay, then come on in. 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Good job!